Okay, let's get started. I'm pre-recording this today. I won't be here tomorrow, so I'm pre-recording this today, and I probably won't take a full hour on this one. I just want to get a little farther into Woodrow Wilson and this whole reevaluation idea of the Constitution no longer being good enough for an industrial society. It was good for an agrarian farming society, those backwoods people, but not so great for people who are, doing industry and so much smarter and better and more advanced, right? So that's what we're looking at here with this is we have some people who don't think the Constitution serves the people anymore. Actually, I think they did know that it served the people. It did not serve the desires of the rich and the powerful to become more rich and more powerful. So we talked in the last video about John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and how they literally crashed Wall Street and then came in acting like the heroes. J.P. Morgan giving out his $200 million in his token certificates that allowed him to really take over even more with his corporate credit. And with the approval of Washington, D.C., of the Congress and the Senate. So it's really, really crazy. So on the surface, it looks like J.P. Morgan has saved the day. And the way it describes it here in the book is like somebody who throws the kid in the river and then goes and rescues them and looks like the hero, but they're the ones who threw him in the river in the first place. Same thing. They threw us under the bus and then they stopped the bus, right? No, it's not a good thing. Now, we're going to talk a little bit how Woodrow Wilson came into the picture because he was an educator. He was a writer. He had a tremendous education, and it was he was basically the founder of the Department of Political Science at Princeton. But remember, he's one of these that thinks the system of checks and balances is outdated. The whole Constitution is outdated. We need to have a very strong, not even legislature anymore. You have a very strong executive, lots of power in the hands of the president because that's how we can get things done quickly. And as we've discussed before, things happening too fast, too much change too soon is bad. It doesn't matter what your organization is. Too much change too fast just leaves people reeling and makes it possible for deceptive things to enter in. And that's dangerous. And so that's what we're looking at here is they're trying to get that ball to roll faster because it is hard to make a law. It is hard to make an amendment. And we've talked about that as we've talked about the Constitution. All of those things are intended to be difficult. We need them to be difficult so that they can't step on the toes of our liberty and our freedom. But he's there, he's at Princeton, he's writing articles. A lot of his ideas and his philosophy kind of just permeated, it kind of went through the nation, through the universities. And the universities are, the interesting thing about university professors is that they typically have never been in the real world. That's not true of all of them. But for many of them, they've been there in academia and they've been teaching and theorizing, but not actually putting things into practice. They don't always even see how things work in the real world. So they say these things are this way and this is that way. And if you do this, you get that. But they've never put it into practice to know. So most of the time, their theories don't hold water. Well, Woodrow Wilson is not any different. And he really had a strong critical feeling towards what he called the archaic nature of the American system of government. And this necessity of creating greater, stronger administrative power in the executive branch. Now, in many areas, Wilson was very critical of the founders' constitutional concepts. He wrote in 1907, he says, "All this trouble, the 1907 Depression, could be averted if we appointed a committee of 6 or 7 public-spirited men like J.P. Morgan to handle the affairs of our country." So he's written this, he puts it out there. Remember what J.P. Morgan did? He helped crash He was the cause of the crash. And here's Woodrow Wilson writing articles talking about how we need a committee of men like him to run the country and forget that Constitution. So his reputation, Woodrow Wilson, his reputation was that he was a very strong spokesman for democracy, for that democratic process. But in actuality, his instinct, his desire was for very strong, centralized power in DC, just like the others are saying. So Morgan really likes what Wilson is saying. He can see the influence that he has over people, the way people listen to him. And so Woodrow Wilson had become the president of Princeton University. So not only did he practically found the political philosophy department, but now he becomes the president of Princeton University. Okay, so he is extremely influential. Princeton University is a big university. It's a well-known university, very well-respected university. So when things come out of there, a lot of credence is given to it. So he becomes president of the Princeton University. He's writing articles like that where he says we need this small committee of men, public-spirited men like J.P. Morgan. And people within Morgan's organization, within his interest group, began encouraging Woodrow Wilson to become involved politically. So don't sit there talking about political theory. We need idea men like you in office. All right? Flattery. And of course, he's not a great guy. He doesn't really believe in our system that has been proven to work for over 125 years. And so he is taken in by that, and they encourage him to enter the political arena. So jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves, but by 1910, he won the election for the governor of New Jersey. By 1912, he had been pushed by those same forces into the presidency of the United States. And so in a very short period of time, he's put in a position to wield a lot of power and to put those philosophies and theories into practice that are so dangerous to the personal liberty and freedom of this nation. So let's go back a little bit. In 1908, J.P. Morgan is working with a friend of his on this little banking idea. He loved printing out certificates and having people use his money. And so he's working with Senator. Okay, we're working in positions of power. Now remember, the interesting thing is that senators were saying things like this too. They're saying we need a strong executive power because the legislative branch is just too slow. It's really not very effective or helpful. That is not job security. But he's working with the Senator Nelson W. Aldrich. And what they are working on is the design or an idea to establish a private central banking system similar to what's operating in Europe. Now, this central banking system is not run by the federal government. Remember, in Article 1 of the Constitution, the legislature is charged with money, the making of money and all of those things. So a central bank, a private central banking system, is not constitutional. It is not constitutional. It's a bad idea. That's what Andrew Jackson was trying to fight against. Thomas Jefferson fought against. 2 times previously had been put into place during wartime as an emergency measure with an ending date. So remember, Andrew Jackson, even before it ended, vetoed it being recreated because an amendment came to his desk saying, let's extend this central bank. And he said, nope, not gonna do it. No way. And so they're looking at doing this because, again, Mr. Morgan had been the hero of the day with his $200 million in certificates that supposedly got the economy going again, which it did, but he crashed it. He caused the crash. He brought it back. It was all a manipulation of the markets. And so he loved this idea. Public pressure is being made, increasing demand to eliminate Wall Street's control and Wall Street's exploitation or taking advantage of the economy. So Morgan's friend, Senator Aldrich here, arranges to have himself made the chairman. Remember how much power a chairman has? A chairman of the National Monetary Commission. Now this commission, remember committees, he makes himself the head of this, the chairman. So if he makes a decision, it's going to go, right? This commission has the task of studying the United States monetary system and recommending ways to improve it. So they hurried off to Europe. Now, why does a commission for the United States go to Europe to figure out what to do? Interesting. They head off to Europe. They spend, this is crazy to me, $300,000. Now, $300,000 in 1908 is a whole lot more than it would be today. But even today, that's a lot. They returned from Europe. They wrote 25 volumes of material. And in those volumes, they were extolling the advantages of Europe's central banking system. So you can see we have been enamored with the way Europe does things for over 100 years. For over 100 years. And yet we had the system that brought a nation with only 6% of the world's population to creating 50%, half of the world's wealth. That's crazy to think that that system should be fixed, changed. That's crazy. So they write 25 volumes. That is like an enormous thing. I think that's bigger than the Obamacare. I think that's bigger than those 2,000 pages. But 25 volumes, and this report is barely published. They put a man named Paul Warburg. Okay, this man is from Germany. He is not an American. They take him, and he is the brother to Max Warburg, who was in charge of Germany's privately owned central bank. So this is the brother to Germany's president of the central bank. He comes on the scene because they put this guy in charge of he's sent over by the Rothschilds family. That's the first problem. The Rothschilds are some of Europe's rich and famous, right? And they finance this man. They bought him a partnership, and they send him over. He associates himself with Wall Street financial letters. He associates himself with Senator Aldrich. So he gets himself into the know with everybody. Then they start circulating all around the country, giving lectures. Propaganda is what I would call this. If you'll think about this in the Book of Mormon, when Amalickiah, who was a dissenter from the Nephites, and he's the one that Captain Moroni was fighting against, when he took his kingmen and escaped over to the Lamanites, he took control of all the armies. He killed the king, had himself made the king. The people of the Lamanites didn't want to fight the Nephites because they were scared. So what does he do? He starts having men give lectures. That's not what the Book of Mormon calls it, but they stand on towers and they talk to the people about how terrible the Nephites are and how we need to go destroy them. Lectures, propaganda. So this man starts giving lectures all over the country. Lecturing at universities, lecturing at business organizations, and he emphasizes this absolute necessity. We must have it. The absolute necessity of a national banking system. Here's why he says, okay, we have to make an enemy. He says we need a national banking system to prevent Wall Street from putting the nation into a boom and bust cycle like we've had in the past that has been so devastating. Who made it happen in 1907 and 1908? This man right here. This man who likes Senator Aldrich, who has this idea that they want to have a central bank. And now we've got this guy who's come over and he's become best buds with this guy and with Wall Street people, giving lectures talking about how they need a central bank to control what Wall Street is doing. He doesn't care what Wall Street is doing. He doesn't care because the central bank is going to do the same thing to the nation that Wall Street did to the nation, because the rich and powerful are in charge of both. The central banking system is a private bank run and controlled by the most wealthy people in the nation, and that's what they're after. So he's saying we need to clip the wings of those big bankers in the Wall Street area. Now that is music to the people's ears. They think that is so great because they had no idea that this was all a part of Wall Street's plan. Okay, so we're going to take a look here. It took them a few years. These meetings started in 1908. Let's come over here, 1922. Actually, in November, let me get the date for you, November 22nd. A very expensive private railroad car pulls out of the station in New Jersey with some very notable people on board. Others joined them later. They met at J.P. Morgan's estate on Jekyll Island, Georgia. So if you ever hear that, that's what this is talking about. Jekyll Island in Georgia is a private estate of J.P. Morgan. And all of these very important people show up. We, of course, have Senator Aldrich. In addition, we have a professional economist and the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, one of the men who went with Aldrich to Europe. His name was A. Piatt Andrew. Now, this is not a name you'll know. The background people don't reveal themselves. He's one of the ones that went to Europe with Aldrich again. And then we have Frank A. Vanderlip. And I'm going to tell you, you're not going to recognize these names. Very powerful men. Okay. He's the president of the National City Bank of New York City. So much for controlling the banks and Wall Street. And then we have Harry P. Davidson. And Harry P. Davidson is a senior partner of J.P. Morgan and Company. So he's a very powerful man in that. And then we have Charles D. Norton. President of Morgan's First National Bank of New York. And of course, we have Paul Warburg. He is the partner of the banking house of Kuhn, Loeb and Company in New York. And lastly, we have a man named Benjamin Strong. Benjamin Strong of the J.P. Morgan and Company central office in New York. 3 of these men work for J.P. Morgan or with J.P. Morgan. So they spend 9 days. They prepare a bill for Congress. They prepare a bill which is submitted as the Aldrich Plan. That's the bill. They spent 9 days here preparing this bill. And they pressured major banks out of $5 million because they needed some money to be able to educate Congress and the American people about the plan and to accept it. So more propaganda. We've got to get people to think this is a good idea because we've never had a central bank long term like this before. They're trying to write a constitutional amendment, not a law for 20 years, a constitutional amendment that this is how our monetary system is going to work. Now, your main resistance comes from the House of Representatives because an investigation, an official investigation, had been put into finding out what happened in 1907 and 1908 with the Wall Street crash. And their investigation revealed some of the operations and financial interests on Wall Street had a responsibility for that crash. And so with that opposition rising, the Republicans couldn't adopt this plan because it had been made known that the banks and Wall Street were behind the crash in 1907 and 1908. And so the Republicans couldn't take this and run with it. So they just repackage it. Let's put some different wrapping on that. Let's give it a different name and let's put it back through there. And let's not have the Republicans do it this time. Let's work through the Democrats. Let's work through the Democrats this time. And that's what they do. They switch up. They go to the Democratic Party. And the alternate plan to the Aldrich plan is called what we have today, the Federal Reserve System. Now that sounds pretty snazzy. This no longer has a person's name on it. It's federal. It sounds like it's official. They call it the Federal Reserve Plan. It's nearly identical to the Aldrich Plan. I don't know what the changes were, but nearly identical to this plan right here that these men spent 9 days putting together on Jekyll Island, Georgia, J.P. Morgan's private estate. And the next task they needed to accomplish was to defeat the Republican president. Because remember, the Republicans didn't want this plan. So they needed to defeat the president. Now, the president at the time was William Howard Taft. They needed a Democratic administration in place because they're pushing this through with the Democratic Party. So they want everybody just to line up because party politics had already become a part of this nation. Kind of started with Andrew Jackson's time frame. Party politics is exactly what Thomas Jefferson warned us against. A two-party system is corrupt. A two-party system is corrupt because they control all the power. And a lot of times they might say different things, but in the background, they're doing all the same things. And so it's just a very, very dangerous thing. So they want to bring in a Democrat. They knew Taft was opposed to the Aldrich Plan. And so this is a very interesting strategy that they put into place. They induced the very popular Teddy Roosevelt, who was a Republican, to run on an independent ticket against Taft, which divides the Republican Party. Now, we've seen that happen in recent years, too. So they have Taft is popular, and he's doing well for the country, and they want him out. And so they take another Republican that the Republicans will look at and like, Teddy Roosevelt, have him run on a different ticket, not the Republican ticket, the independent ticket. Takes votes out of the Republican Party that weakens their voting power, and the Democrat gets in. And that's exactly what they did. So after dividing it, and providing the money and the strategy to help Roosevelt take those votes away. At the same time, George Harvey, and he's the president of the Morgan magazine, or controlled magazine, Harper's Weekly. It also had Rockefeller money behind it, and they got behind Wilson. And so they put Wilson on their Democratic ticket. They used Cleveland Dodge of Rockefeller's National City Bank, J. Ogden Armour, James Stillman, George F. Baker, Jacob Schiff, Bernard M. Baruch, Henry Morgenthau, Adolph S. Oakes, the publisher of the New York Times. So these are the powerful men behind bringing him into play. The Morgan officials who were managing Teddy Roosevelt's campaign also put money behind Woodrow Wilson. Sound like a conspiracy? Sounds like one to me. So the strategy works. Wilson gets in. Now we've got a very progressive man who does not believe in our Constitution, who believes that the executive branch should have a lot of power and the legislative branch very little power. And they put him into place. He is put into the White House in 1913. Okay? 1913, he's put into the White House. And so he brings with him his Wall Street advisors. One of them is Colonel Edward Mandell House, who is known now to have been the major policymaker and manager of the entire Wilson administration. He was like a pile driver, just boom, boom, boom. That's where his tactics, just to pound people down, right? So he would force a bill through Congress that would set up this Federal Reserve System. He just like a pile, and they drive these big things down into the ground to be a foundation for a building. That's what a pile driver does. He acts like that to push this bill through. Woodrow Wilson, of course, signs it into law. And of course, all of the deception that surrounded it, because remember, it starts off, it was the Aldrich plan, and they were trying to get it through with the Republicans. But because Congress had rejected it, they redress it, repackage it, give it a new name, Federal Reserve System. And the financiers on Wall Street pretend to protest this bill. This is a terrible bill. It will destroy us. It will. So they pretend to protest against it, which really pushes public opinion towards it. It pushes the opinion of the senators and the House representatives for it. And so this fight that they had against the Federal Reserve System and this legislation was all a sham. They weren't against it at all, but they wanted to look like it so that people would think that they were working against Wall Street. Okay. Congress took this hook, line, and sinker. It was like catching a fish. And so this plan was supposed to do a couple of things, some very important things. Let me write these down. I think you want to know what kind of things they were promising that this would do. It didn't, but this is what they said it would do. They said, if we do this, we're going to prevent depressions. Tell that to the people who lived in the 1930s, who lived through the Depression. They're supposed to prevent depressions. They were supposed to stabilize our money system. We have no stability in our money system. But this is what they were promising the Federal Reserve would do. Prevent depressions, stabilize the money system, and get Wall Street off the people. So that they couldn't be under control and get off the people's backs. Okay? One congressman saw through this. His name was Charles A. Lindbergh. He is the father of the Charles Lindbergh who flew his transatlantic flight. One man, Charles A. Lindbergh from Minnesota, sees through it, raises the warning cry, but he is ignored. So, December 22nd, right before Christmas, right before they go to their break, right before they're not meeting anymore and there's no real possible protest against it, their final action before the session closed. You should always be watching what they're doing right before their session closes, because that's when they usually put the worst things through. The House voted for it 298 to 60. 298 to 60, overwhelming majority in favor of the new Federal Reserve System. The Senate voted, and their votes were 43 to 25, 2-1 almost. 43 to 25 for the Federal Reserve System. And then on December 23rd, 1913, Wilson signs it. He signs it into law, giving that Federal Reserve System, that central private bank, the power over our monetary system. Signs it into law that very day. Oh, sorry. The House votes the 22nd, the Senate votes the 23rd, and he signs it on the 23rd, the very day it came to his desk. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Andrew Jackson, these men had to be rolling over in their graves that day. This is what they'd been fighting against from the very beginning, and now it's signed into law with this overwhelming majority. Overwhelming, 298 to 60, 43 to 25, really? They have been duped, and so are we. What they didn't really realize is that they create, perhaps, I hope, they created a powerful, powerful engine with this private central bank, because it gave them the power to indulge in their just voracious appetite for boom and bust cycles. We love it when we have a boom. We love it when we have a bust, a bear market, a bull market, a bear market, a bull market, up and down and all around, confiscating taxes, smothering national indebtedness, because what do banks do? They loan money. So we want you to take a loan, because then we make money back in interest. We want loans. And then the promotion of war on a worldwide scale, because when you promote more war, there's always money going into the war machine. They're going to finance it. They're going to make more money. It's all a scheme to put more money into the pockets of the very, very rich. It doesn't help the government unless you're in on it. It doesn't help the American people. It is a power grab over these people. No one had any idea that this would confiscate the people's gold, because no longer would we be on the gold system. We would just make paper notes with nothing to back them up. What did J.P. Morgan do when he did $200 million in certificates? It was like paper money, right? That had worked so well before. And so now we're going to see that the people's gold is gone. Savings are diminished because of inflation. Because even if your money stays exactly the same, it's worth less when we have inflation. It becomes worth less. It's not backed by anything of value. So if the dollar is worth less, then your money doesn't buy as much. You might have the same amount of money. You can't buy the same because prices went up. So confiscation of gold, diminishing people's savings with inflation, eroding the value of insurance policies and fixed incomes by destroying the stability of the dollar. Somebody who lives on a fixed income has no way of putting more money into their monthly income. So when things cost more, they just don't have the ability to buy as much. That destroys people. That destroys people. It destroys families. And of course, we become very entangled with other nations as opposed to being independent from the rest of the world, which we should be independent. We should not be connected. We should not be a part of League of Nations. We should not be a part of the United Nations. We should not be a part of anything that takes away our sovereignty. Nothing. And those are the things that we start to see as we lose that sovereignty. And as the 20th century rolls out, we see more and more of the damage done by this Federal Reserve System, the private central banking system. It manages the money supply. It influences the lending activity. They determine what the interest rates are. So the way this works, there are 12 regional banks in the United States, and each of those have not a president, but the head of a bank, and they meet once a month, and they decide, those 12 men decide monthly what the policy is going to be for monetary things in our nation. We have no control over it. 12 men, closed room, no idea what's going on. That is a part of undoing this nation. So not only making the executive branch too powerful through executive orders, having the Congress ignore the Constitution and the creation of agencies which are under the executive, the judicial system beginning to make legislation basically from the bench, controlling our everyday lives, Congress and voting for, instead of general welfare, specific welfare, things that only are a blessing or a help to a certain amount of people, but not the whole nation. That's the difference between general and specific. General benefits everybody. All of these things are a part of the undoing, the unpicking of the seams that hold together the Constitution, the bonds that are supposed to control the government in order to ensure the people's freedom. Now, on Thursday, we will talk about a couple of amendments that were made. That'll be part of our Constitution studies, as well as going into our next principle of 5,000-year leap. We will talk about a couple of the amendments that were made during this time frame that did so much damage. Goes right along with everything else we've already seen. Some of the other events that happen in this time frame, I just want to bring out real quick, and you can spend some time looking into them. In 1906, we have the earthquake and fire in San Francisco. Now, that's not man-made, just some events that happened during this time affecting our world. 1914, we helped to build the Panama Canal. I'm going to show you this picture really quick. Before the canal, if you wanted to get from one side to the other, you had to go all the way around. Well, right here in Panama is a very narrow strip of island. You can see it down here in this better. And they've made a canal that goes across it. They use a locks system. Now, the way locks work is it's like gates. And so they close the gate, they fill it up so that a ship can sail into it. And then, so there's a system of gates. So if you have a ship in this lock, there's a gate here, right? Here's a ship, here's a gate. There's a gate in front, a gate behind. Here's the ship, and the water's deep enough for it. Well, then, while this one is still here, they close the next one, fill this one up so the ship can sail into it. Close the gate behind them. Now this one back here can be drained. And they just keep doing that until they get across the canal. Much, much shorter. Instead of going like this, they only need to do that. Remember, one of the things that the explorers to the Americas were always trying to figure out was, how can we get across this vast land? What is the overland passage, right? Well, there wasn't one, but they made one. 1909, Captain Robert E. Peary discovers the North Pole. And in your book, you have his account of doing that. And 1903, the first airplane to fly successfully, Orville and Wilbur Wright in North Carolina, Kitty Hawk, 12 seconds. Remember when J.P. Morgan's people all went to Jekyll Island to have their meeting, they went on a very luxurious train car because there were no private jets at that point, private train cars. And so Orville and Wilbur Wright, with the discovery of how to maintain flight, made a huge difference in how we travel. So some very interesting things happening here in this time frame. But I'm going to go ahead and close now, and you can, I will send this link to everyone so that you can watch it at your convenience. And then Thursday we'll go live again and be able to talk more about these two amendments, the 16th and the 17th Amendment, as well as the next principle in the 5,000-year leap. So I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.